Hey guys, if you watch this channel, you know that all my videos are spontaneous, but this one is a little bit extra spontaneous. That's why there's actually a plate of fruit just in the edge of the screen there. I'm about to go to the gym, that's why I have the headphones in. But you know, I really wanted to speak on this issue. If you've watched the channel for a while, you know that I have very often raised tough questions about comparisons made between veganism and various struggles for human rights. I've raised questions about whether or not these are useful comparisons, how these guide us in our activism, how they guide us politically, philosophically, and pragmatically. Most comparisons, comparisons are odious, as we say. Most comparisons are going to be useful and meaningful within certain limits, and then they're going to become meaningless, absurd, or counterproductive in others. Even the argument that you should be vegan to avoid getting cancer, in some contexts it's meaningful, in some contexts it's worth talking about, and in some contexts it just becomes ridiculous. Why do you refuse to wear leather shoes? The answer can't be because you don't want to get cancer. It can't be an hysterical fear of cancer. Cancer science is relevant to veganism. It is interesting. It is rewarding to know about that stuff. But the ethical and political arguments can't be based on that. So in the same way, the type of parallel that people try to construe between human rights and animal rights, or just between human rights and veganism, make it simple, sometimes worth talking about, sometimes it's meaningful, and sometimes it becomes meaningless. And if you watch my earlier videos that criticize direct action everywhere, you'll see those issues coming up again and again. Those questions, hard questions, but the limits of that approach and how this connects to pragmatic questions of future veganism as a political movement. I have a quotation here from the Humane Society in the United States. In general, all vegans love to hate the Humane Society because they're not vegan enough. They're not humane enough. What can I tell you? The Humane Society said the following when asked by a mainstream news source to comment on the contradictions within the free-range chicken movement. So, these are animal welfarist movements that slightly improve or somewhat improve the conditions of hens that, are born to die, that live their whole lives waiting to be executed with a date marked on the calendar for when their heads are going to be chopped up, when they're going to die a terrible, violent death in order to provide food for human beings that is unnecessary and unhealthy. These are hens, however, so there are various political movements that instead of trying to abolish animal agriculture, instead of encouraging people to become vegan, instead of taking an ecological and ethical approach to these facts, instead just tries to make their lives more comfortable for the short time that they live inside a world of concrete and steel fences and roofs, etc. So, it is what it is. This is a fissure that most vegans feel very strongly about. So when asked about this, the Humane Society of the United States representative said the following. He says, quote, "With companies like Costco, it is better to welcome them for taking the first steps rather than punish them for not taking the last step." So he's saying when you're looking at the conditions of chickens that are raised on a factory farm to provide meat for a large corporation like Costco, you should congratulate Costco. You should thank them for taking some of these steps towards free range, towards more humane conditions for the chickens, rather than punishing them for failing to live up to some higher expectations that vegans might have, or that even, vegetarians and animal welfare people might have. Okay? No. He's wrong. And he's not 10% wrong, he's 100% wrong. And this is one sense in which the comparison to human rights is meaningful. In some contexts it's meaningless, in some contexts it's counterproductive, but in this case we have to say no. When we're talking about slavery, we're not talking about the working conditions of slaves. We're not talking about matters of degree, difference of degree. We're talking about a matter of principle. Are you going to abolish slavery or not? When we're talking about hard issues in human rights, I hate to say it, but in some countries, do women have the right to drive a car? Some of you will know right away which countries I'm talking about, but there are some countries where really women do not have the same human rights as men. Women do not have the right to vote. The women do not have the right to drive a car. They do not have the same rights in a very practical sense as men. We don't congratulate those countries for taking the first steps. On the contrary, we have a very negative and punitive attitude towards them as long as they are violating any of the principles of human rights. And I've been on the other side of that debate in the following sense. When you're living in a country like Cambodia, and Cambodia is not that big a country, so you meet people who are part of the government, you meet people who are representing all sides of the political puzzle. There are Cambodians who support their own government there, and they'll say to you, look, we can never satisfy you people. Human rights in Cambodia lately aren't that bad. Human rights in Cambodia are better than they were 10 years ago. They're better than they were 30 years ago. Or maybe they'll say something like, human rights in Cambodia are better than they are in Myanmar. They're better than they are in Indonesia or Malaysia. Why can't you just be happy with us? Why can't you just congratulate us for taking the steps that we've taken, for the improvements? Why is it this continual criticism and dissatisfaction, mostly from Westerners, but whatever? Why is it that human rights people are never satisfied? It's never enough for you people. You never throw us a party. You never congratulate us for doing the positive things we've done. So it's just totally thankless. And, this is parallel to this question with the Humane Society of the United States. But that is actually, you can criticize it, you can complain about it. That is actually part of the logic of human rights, is that it is an inflexible minimum standard. It's an argument not for an ideal. It's an argument for a minimum standard. And as long as you're failing to meet that minimum standard, you don't get any praise. You don't get any congratulation. And I really understand. I really sympathize. Here he's asking us to sympathize with a corporation like Costco. I can't really sympathize with that. Whatever. Costco is making money out of slaughtering animals. I don't have a lot of sympathy. But it's true, when I was inside a country like Laos, when I was inside a country like Cambodia, where there are ongoing human rights problems, it is very easy to sympathize with the other side, where the government is saying, well, come on, we have more democracy than we used to have. We have more freedom of speech than we used to have. Human rights, it's not perfect, but come on, it's not perfect in America. Why can't you guys just throw us a party? Why can't you guys just celebrate the progress we've made? Or why can't you or conversely, they say, we're never going to satisfy you people anyway, so just why should we even listen to your criticism, right? Admittedly, that is a strategic disadvantage of the human rights approach. But when we're talking about human rights, again, and this may be a reason in many contexts not to address veganism in parallel to human rights, but when we're talking about human rights, we're not talking about the arts. We're not talking about a beautiful painting. We're not talking about something where the upper limits of human achievement matter. We're not talking about something where genius and creativity and something beautiful is rewarded. We are talking about a minimum standard. We're not talking about something like sports, where human excellence and strength and vitality and, maybe some kind of improvised acumen, all kinds of talents get rewarded in sports. Where it's not like the Olympics, where we're celebrating who gets the gold medal and who gets the silver medal. I've never even heard of that. Who gets the bronze? Who gets the gold medal in human rights? Who gets the gold medal in animal rights? Our attention is never focused at the upper levels of achievement, and our attention is not even focused on doing the best you can. I know people ridicule this in the sports and in the arts and in music, giving people an award or congratulating them because, they gave their best effort. Maybe you didn't get the gold medal, maybe you didn't even get the bronze medal, but you gave it your best. You came up somewhere on that ladder of achievement. We don't look at any of that, right? When we're talking about human rights, we're talking about minimum standards. And anyone who fails those minimum standards is facing relentless, unending criticism with, in a sense, no positive motivation, no positive reward. And that is implicitly the fissure at the basis here that separates the Humane Society of the United States being willing to collaborate with and congratulate Costco for the slightly better conditions they've given their chickens before they cut their heads off, and the hard, vegan political position of, no, it's still wrong, it's still bad, it's still evil. And in a sense, your version of evil is worse. It's more dangerous. It's more despicable because you're pretending it's humane. You've taken something evil and you've added onto the surface of it a myth of humanitarian sympathy. You've made it worse because you candy coated it. I wanted this video to be relatively brief, so I'm not going to get into that in any great depth. But I think that's also, even what I've just said, there's this bizarre irony within veganism, because the abolitionist position doesn't want to admit that there are differences, there are degrees of difference, shades of gray. There's better and worse morally. That a chicken is better off if it's free range as opposed to living in a cage, etc. I don't feel that's a problem for veganism. I think you can take an absolute moral position that eating meat is wrong, and you can also recognize that a bird that's able to walk around is less oppressed, is less miserable, is in less physical agony than a bird that's literally has to live its whole life in a cage the size of a shoebox and can't actually spread its wings. I don't feel there's a conflict there. Some vegans do. But I think the other sense that's interesting here that I've just mentioned, in which there's a moral distinction, maybe makes people uncomfortable, is talking about the fact that it is actually ethically worse to be murdering these animals, to be forcing them to live their whole lives in confinement and then die so they can decorate your dinner plate, and to do so with this humanitarian myth on top, that actually makes it morally worse. But I was reminded, I talked about this with one of my teachers here in Chinese recently, but I said, on some level, we all relate to the moral issue there. Because, if two boxers get into a ring, they don't hate each other, they don't hate each other, it's just a boxing match, just a competition. Two boxers get in the ring, one of them might die. It happens every so often. Boxers get brain injuries, or they get their face caved in, they get their nose caved in, somehow they get concussion, and they actually die after the boxing match in hospital. It does happen from time to time. If that happens, in a sense it's murder, in a sense it's just an accident. But everyone acknowledges, what? These were two adult men, possibly adult women. They stepped into a boxing ring, they consented to this. They're equals, they're roughly the same height, they're roughly the same weight. It's a fair fight, it's a boxing match. There's a sense of fair play there, and we can accept the consequences of life and death. But nobody would accept it if a grown man got into the boxing ring with a child, with a defenseless child. And that same sense of justice and injustice that's so fundamental to the human spirit, frankly, it's there also with these animals. You know what? If this was going on with a human being fighting for survival against a bear, that's different from the way we're treating chickens, because chickens are exactly in that position like the child in the boxing ring. There's no sense of fair play. So to put a humanitarian veneer on top of that really does make it worse. Violence can be justified in so many ways, and simply the logic of the boxing match, the logic of the equality of the competitors, or the logic of self-defense when you're attacked by a bear. We're dealing with something that is so fundamentally evil in taking a chicken out of its natural habitat, in breeding it, in modifying its body, in depriving it of anything like an experience of its natural habitat, in domesticating it, in breaking its spirit, in forcing it to live and die indoors without seeing the sky. And again, to produce food that is unnecessary and unhealthy, etc. Many ironies to it. And meanwhile, nobody even tries to argue that a boxing match is humane. Nobody's looking to make these excuses. Nobody's looking to candy coat it, right? Because we don't need to make the excuse. There isn't that fundamental injustice there. So yes, there are strange degrees of difference. There are shades of gray. There are questions of better and worse. Yes, in the treatment of chickens and in the excuses we make for it. And on an unspoken level that I think even meat eaters are aware of, there is this difference between a bird that's managed to live its whole life in the forest, spreading its wings, exercising its nature, and a bird that's been not only killed, but deprived of the opportunity to have anything like a life before it dies through this, depraved industry that we've invented. And that we now, try to flatter with these meaningless catchphrases like free range.